ex called asking why our diabetic daughter didn't have the insulin pump he'd been paying $700 monthly for, but my boyfriend answered by smashing his coffee mug and saying we don't need his charity. I stared at my phone. What money? What insulin pump? Emily was hooked to a machine because we couldn't afford home supplies. Behind me, Trevor's coffee mug shattered against the floor. She doesn't have a pump. We can't even afford test strips. My ex's voice turned sharp. The $700 I send every month for Emily's medical supplies and food. Trevor lunged for my phone, but I switched to speaker, pulling away. You haven't sent anything. She's dying. We would have used it. I've sent $700 monthly for 4 years. I'm texting you the proof right now. Screenshots flooded my phone. Direct deposits, routing number ending in 5498. That was Trevor's personal account. I work 3 jobs, my ex continued, voice cracking. Sleep in my truck between shifts, shower at truck stops, everything for Emily. I calculated quickly. 700 times 48 months, $33,600. Bile rose in my throat. We'd been evicted 5 times. Emily and I share 1 meal daily, usually rice. I donate plasma till my arms are scarred. Clean offices all night, vomit from the chemicals, go back the next night. Emily's 13 and already had 6 hospitalizations this year for diabetic comas. Each time they said she might not wake up. You've been stealing her medical money, I said, staring at Trevor. He shrugged. I didn't want his charity. We don't need him. My ex's voice broke completely. I haven't eaten in 2 days to afford this month's payment while my daughter's dying. You stole $33,600 while Emily's organs are failing? Trevor crossed his arms. I provide for this family, not him. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Provide? I lost my nursing job because I kept collapsing. Malnutrition. Now I scrub floors, pick through dumpsters, sell my hair. My hands shook as I grabbed his phone. Who's Michelle? Why are you sending her heart emojis? The Venmo history made me retch. Hundreds of payments to M while we starved. My teeth are falling out, I continued, my voice rising. Haven't had a period in 3 years. My body's eating itself. On speaker, my ex made a choking sound. What about Emily's school? He asked. She's failing everything. Falls asleep from hunger. Does homework at McDonald's for Wi-Fi till they throw her out. I scrolled through Trevor's credit cards. You spent $400 on dinner last week? Emily steals toilet paper from school bathrooms because we can't afford it. She hasn't been to a birthday party in 4 years. I continued, rage building. Kids call her garbage girl because her coat is a trash bag. In Minnesota. More receipts, ski trips, Vegas, hotels. You have another apartment, I whispered, finding the lease. $1,500 monthly. We've been sleeping in the car while you keep a bachelor pad? My ex was yelling now. Where is my daughter? I couldn't stop. She hasn't spoken in 2 months. Pulls out her hair in clumps. Drew herself in a coffin titled, When I Stop Being Hungry. Trevor finally looked uncomfortable. It's not. Her feet are rotting in shoes from a dumpster. 5 sizes too big, held with duct tape. You took Michelle to Hawaii? I showed him the Instagram posts. While Emily's teeth turned black, while she went blind because we can't afford glasses, she tested positive for tuberculosis. I screamed. From that basement apartment with black mold. Remember? Where sewage backed up? Where she got ringworm and scabies? My ex was sobbing audibly. I've been killing myself. Thought I was saving her. I kept going. She weighs 67 pounds at 13. Stunted growth. Looks like a dying 8-year-old. Stopped getting on her period before it started because her body's shutting down. The medical neglect photos on my phone. I pull her teeth with pliers when they obsess. She screams but says, it's okay, mommy. I know we're poor. Trevor headed for the door but I blocked him. She wanted to be a doctor. Now she says, why plan? I'll be dead by 18. My voice broke. Every seizure, every coma, every night she cried from hunger while you played house with your hoe. I'm calling 911, my ex said, suddenly calm and deadly. This is attempted murder. Medical neglect causing organ failure. Trevor's face went white. I have another account. My ex continued. $50,000 saved for her kidney transplant. Trevor was throwing clothes in bags, already packed. 4 years of fraud, theft, child endangerment resulting in permanent damage. Through the window, red and blue lights flashed. My lawyers already filed emergency custody. The police has been notified about wire fraud. Trevor grabbed his bags, looked at me with pure hatred. 48 months of evidence. Every transfer. Every letter you destroyed. The sirens got louder. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from the hospital. The screen showed 3 words that made my stomach drop. Emily collapsed. School. I shoved past Trevor and ran outside, my bare feet hitting the cold pavement. The car keys were already in my hand and I didn't remember grabbing them. Trevor yelled something behind me, but the police were already getting out of their cars and moving toward him. I jumped in our old Honda and turned the key 3 times before it started. The hospital was 20 minutes away, but I made it in 12, running 2 red lights and almost hitting a mailbox. The emergency room doors slid open and I saw Emily on a bed with tubes everywhere. Her face was gray and her lips looked blue. Dr. Amara Collins was already working on her, checking monitors and adjusting IV lines. She told me Emily's blood sugar was over 600 and her body was shutting down. They were pushing fluids and insulin, but her kidneys weren't responding right. I grabbed Emily's hand and it felt cold and limp. The heart monitor kept beeping too fast. Dr. Collins said they were doing everything they could, but Emily needed the ICU. 2 nurses wheeled her bed down the hall and I ran alongside holding her hand. About an hour later, a man in a suit walked up with a clipboard. Nicholas Ramirez from the hospital social services needed to talk to me about Emily's condition and our home situation. He sat me down in a small room and started asking questions. I told him about the stolen money, about Trevor taking $33,000 meant for Emily's medicine. He wrote everything down and asked for more details about our living conditions. I explained about sleeping in the car and eating once a day. He asked how long Emily had been without proper medical care. I said 4 years and watched his face change. He asked about the evictions and I told him 5 times in 3 years. My ex walked through the ICU doors looking like he hadn't slept in days. His work shirt was stained and his boots were falling apart. We both stood by Emily's bed not looking at each other. He reached out to touch her face and his hand shook. The machines kept beeping and nurses kept checking things. He asked the nurse about her numbers and she said they were working to stabilize her. Detective Julian Wright showed up while we were standing there. He pulled me aside and said they needed my statement about the wire fraud. Trevor had run when they tried to arrest him, which made things worse. Wright said they already had a warrant out and asked if I had the evidence. I handed him my phone with all the screenshots of Trevor's Venmo payments to Michelle. He put on gloves and put my phone in an evidence bag, giving me a receipt. He said the financial crimes unit would pull everything off it. Wright asked me to write down everything I remembered about Trevor's spending while we couldn't afford food. I started writing and my hand cramped from how much there was. My ex and I ended up in the hallway while they worked on Emily. He pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of his truck with a sleeping bag in the back. The truck stop showers he used had moldy walls and broken tiles. His time card showed he worked 19 hours yesterday. He showed me receipts for the money orders he sent every month. I threw up in a trash can when I saw how much overtime he worked. Sophie Hall from CPS showed up that afternoon with a thick folder. She was nice, but asked hard questions about where we lived and how we got food. She wanted to know about Emily's medical history and why she wasn't getting insulin. I explained about Trevor stealing the money, and she wrote it all down. She looked at Emily through the glass and shook her head. She said they'd need to do a full investigation. Dr. Collins came back with test results printed on several pages. She showed us the kidney function numbers, and they were bad. Emily had early kidney damage from years of uncontrolled diabetes. She needed dialysis maybe, or at least special medicine we couldn't afford. The insurance we had wouldn't cover much. Dr. Collins said Emily would need months of treatment to get stable. She might need a kidney transplant eventually if things got worse. My legs gave out, and a nurse brought me a chair. My ex asked about treatment options and costs. Dr. Collins said it would be expensive, but there were programs that might help. Detective Wright called while we were talking to the doctor. They were searching Trevor's secret apartment and finding all kinds of stuff. He needed me to look at pictures and identify things that might have been bought with Emily's money. There were photos of electronics, furniture, jewelry, and vacation souvenirs. I recognized a watch that cost $2,000 from last Christmas. There were designer bags that Michelle had posted on Instagram. The apartment had a huge TV and gaming system. Wright said they found receipts going back years. The forensic accountants were tracking every dollar. He said Trevor would face serious federal charges for wire fraud. The stolen amount was enough for major prison time. Trevor's credit cards showed fancy dinners while Emily ate expired food from food banks. There were charges at stores I'd never heard of that sold things we could never dream of buying. Something doesn't add up here. Trevor's been stealing money for 4 years while keeping a whole secret apartment and girlfriend. The timing of this ex calling right when Emily's dying feels oddly convenient. Like everyone suddenly knows exactly what's been happening all at once. Wright said they'd get restitution, but it would take time through the courts. Emily might get some emergency funds from victim services. My ex had already talked to his lawyer about getting the money released. For now, we just had to focus on keeping Emily alive and getting her stable. Nicholas Ramirez showed up the next morning with a thick folder of papers from Emily's school. He spread them out on the little table in the hospital room while Emily slept. The attendance records made my stomach hurt. She'd missed 47 days just this school year, and it was only February. Her teacher wrote notes about Emily falling asleep at her desk every single day. There were pictures the school nurse took showing Emily wearing the same dirty clothes for 3 weeks straight. The guidance counselor documented that Emily never brought lunch and wouldn't accept free meals because she was too ashamed. Nicholas pointed to a section where her math teacher wrote that Emily did her homework perfectly, but couldn't stay awake for tests. Sophie Hall called me that afternoon to schedule a home visit, but said she'd need police to come with her. She explained it was standard procedure when there were safety concerns about the living conditions. I felt sick with shame, but told her I understood it was for Emily's safety. She asked for the address of our last apartment, the one with the black mold and sewage problems. My ex spent hours at the police station with Detective Wright going through 4 years of bank statements. He showed every single $700 transfer he'd made, month after month without missing one. Wright confirmed each payment went straight into Trevor's personal account, ending in 5498. The detective took photos of every statement and had my ex sign forms saying these were true copies. Meanwhile, the hospital social worker pulled our housing records from the county office. 5 evictions in 3 years, each one showing we got kicked out for not paying rent. The records showed we lost everything in the second eviction when the landlord threw our stuff in a dumpster. Emily's insulin and testing supplies got thrown away that time, and she ended up in the ICU 2 days later. I sat with Sophie in a small conference room explaining how I sold plasma twice a week at 2 different centers. I showed her the scars running up both arms from hundreds of needle sticks. I told her about searching dumpsters behind grocery stores at 3 in the morning for expired food. She wrote everything down in her notebook, keeping her face neutral, but I could see her jaw tighten. I explained how I ate 1 meal every 2 days so Emily could have something each day. Sophie asked about my weight loss, and I admitted I'd dropped 60 pounds in the last year. She documented that I weighed 92 pounds at 5 foot 6 inches tall. The court clerk called to tell us the emergency custody hearing was set for 2 days later. Sophie explained that both my ex and I would be evaluated as potential caregivers for Emily. She said the judge would focus on Emily's immediate safety and medical needs above everything else. Detective Wright got a search warrant for Trevor's secret apartment that same afternoon. He called me from there, describing what he was finding as he went through each room. There was a 70-inch TV mounted on the wall and gaming systems worth thousands of dollars. He found receipts for furniture that cost more than we'd spent on food in 5 years. In the bedroom closet, he discovered women's clothes with the tags still on them. The sizes matched what Michelle wore in her Instagram photos, and there was lingerie from expensive stores. Wright photographed travel documents showing Trevor took Michelle to Cancun, Vegas, and Hawaii while we were getting evicted. He found jewelry receipts, restaurant bills for $200 dinners, and tickets to concerts we could never dream of affording. The Financial Crimes Unit spent 2 days creating a detailed timeline of Trevor's theft. They matched every diverted payment to specific times when Emily was in the hospital. One $700 payment came in the same day Emily had a seizure from low blood sugar. Another payment arrived while we were sleeping in the car because we'd been evicted again. The investigators found Trevor spent $9,000 on a motorcycle, while Emily's teeth were rotting from malnutrition. Sophie discovered something even worse when she went through our mail history at the post office. Trevor had been intercepting letters from my ex for 4 years. There were registered letters about setting up direct medical supply deliveries that I never received. My ex had tried to arrange for insulin to be shipped straight to a pharmacy for us to pick up. He'd written asking for Emily's doctor information so he could pay bills directly. Trevor destroyed every single letter, keeping me in the dark about the help my ex was desperately trying to provide. The hospital pharmacist, an older woman with kind eyes, started working on emergency applications that evening. She brought a stack of forms for charity care programs and emergency Medicaid assistance. She said Emily qualified for at least 6 different programs that could cover her insulin and supplies. We'd never known these programs existed because Trevor handled all our mail and told me we made too much to qualify. The pharmacist worked through each application with me, helping me fill out the income sections with zeros. She said she'd personally walk the applications through the system to get them approved faster. Emily woke up out during one of these sessions and asked if she could have apple juice. The nurse grabbed a juice box from the nurse's station and helped Emily take small sips while the pharmacist kept working on the forms. My ex walked in carrying a bag from the cafeteria downstairs and pushed it toward me without saying anything. The smell of hot food made my stomach cramp after days of nothing but water and the occasional cracker from vending machines. I took the container to a corner chair and ate slowly. Chicken soup and bread that felt like the best meal I'd ever had. My hands stopped shaking for the first time in weeks as actual nutrition hit my system. The pharmacist finished the last application and said she'd walk them to the billing office herself right now. My ex pulled out his phone and started showing me photos from the last 4 years. His truck with a sleeping bag in the back, pay stubs from 3 different jobs, recordings on his phone of calls where he'd begged Trevor to let him send supplies directly to pharmacies. Each photo showed timestamps proving he'd been living this way while sending money he thought was keeping Emily alive. Sophie arrived with 2 police officers to document our last apartment before the landlord cleaned it out. They took samples from the black walls where mold grew thick as carpet, photographed the bathroom where raw sewage had backed up through the tub for months. The officers bagged evidence while Sophie measured Emily's bedroom, 6 feet by 8 feet with no window and mushrooms growing from the ceiling corner. She took pictures of the kitchen where roaches scattered from empty cabinets and the fridge that hadn't worked in 2 years. Detective Wright called from the bank where investigators had found 3 more accounts Trevor kept hidden. The forensic accountant traced payments to Michelle for vacations, jewelry, designer clothes while we were eating from food banks. The total stolen climbed past $40,000 when they added credit cards Trevor opened using my ex's information without permission. Wright said they'd frozen everything and started asset recovery, but most of the money was already spent on Michelle's lifestyle. The court clerk's call came while I was helping Emily sip more juice. She confirmed Trevor had been served at his secret apartment but hadn't filed any response or hired a lawyer yet. His absence would be noted at tomorrow's emergency hearing, and the judge would likely rule without him there. Sophie handed me a legal pad and asked me to write down every medical emergency Emily had faced in the last 4 years. My hand cramped as I filled page after page with dates of seizures, comas, infections that went untreated because we couldn't afford antibiotics. January when her blood sugar hit 800 and she almost died. March when she went blind for 3 days from diabetic retinopathy. June when her kidneys started failing and we got turned away from the ER for no insurance. September when I found her unconscious and had to carry her 2 miles to the hospital because we had no car or phone. Each entry brought back the terror of watching my daughter's body fail while Trevor spent thousands on his mistress. Dr. Collins came in with new test results and pulled a chair close to my bed. She explained Emily's kidneys were functioning at 40% capacity from years of uncontrolled blood sugar. Her growth was permanently stunted. She'd never reach normal height for her age. The nerve damage in her feet and hands would likely be permanent even with proper treatment now. Her eyes showed scarring that would affect her vision forever, and her liver showed early signs of damage from constant ketoacidosis. Some of this could be managed with proper medication and monitoring, but the years of neglect had taken their toll on every organ system. Sophie returned with a folder of options for Emily's immediate placement after discharge. She recommended keeping Emily with family if we could secure proper housing and medical care rather than foster placement. The supervised custody would mean regular home visits and drug testing for both parents, but it was better than Emily going to strangers. She'd already started the paperwork for emergency food stamps and Medicaid to cover Emily's supplies. My ex had been on the phone with his bank and came back with news. There's something deeply unsettling about how Trevor managed to hide those letters for 4 whole years. How does someone intercept registered mail that consistently? The way my ex tried sending help directly to pharmacies while we were literally starving makes me wonder what other attempts at communication got blocked that we still don't know about. He'd withdrawn $15,000 from the transplant fund and found an extended stay motel that would take cash up front for 2 months. It had a kitchenette where we could store insulin properly and was on the bus line to the hospital for Emily's appointments. The room was small but clean with 2 beds and working heat, luxuries we hadn't had in years. He'd also bought a mini fridge specifically for medical supplies and a box of testing strips that would last a month. Sophie approved the motel for temporary placement and started the paperwork for Emily's discharge once she was medically stable. The pharmacist returned with approval for 3 of the assistance programs, which would cover Emily's insulin and supplies going forward. Wright called again to say they'd arrested Trevor at a traffic stop, and he was processed at the county jail. He'd already started blaming me for everything, claiming I'd hidden the money and made up the whole story. Michelle had been questioned and claimed she thought Trevor was divorced and wealthy, though Wright said her story kept changing. The detective explained Trevor would likely make bail within 24 hours, but the charges were serious enough to move forward. Wire fraud, theft over $10,000, and child endangerment causing bodily harm carried real prison time if convicted. Sophie came back with papers for me to sign about getting help with my own health problems since I'd been starving myself to feed Emily for years. The nutrition counselor at the hospital took one look at me and said I was severely malnourished with signs of scurvy from lack of vitamin C. My gums bled constantly, and some of my teeth were loose, which explained why eating hurt so much. She set me up with meal replacement shakes and vitamins plus weekly weigh-ins to track my recovery. The mental health person asked about my sleeping habits, and I admitted I hadn't slept more than 3 hours straight in months because I was always checking if Emily was still breathing. They diagnosed me with severe anxiety and PTSD from watching my daughter almost die over and over while being unable to help her. Wright called to say he'd tracked down Michelle at her apartment and she'd answered questions for 2 hours. She kept changing her story about whether she knew Trevor was married or not, but swore she thought he was rich and divorced. She showed him texts where Trevor said his ex-wife was crazy and trying to take all his money, which is why he needed somewhere safe to stay sometimes. Wright said her story didn't add up because she deposited checks with my name on them, and Trevor's wedding ring was visible in photos she'd posted. 3 days later, Wright called again to say they'd pulled Trevor over for speeding and arrested him on the spot. Trevor immediately started yelling that I was a terrible mother who couldn't manage money, and that's why Emily was sick. He claimed I spent all the money on drugs even though I'd never touched drugs in my life and had clean drug tests from my plasma donations to prove it. Wright said this was typical for financial abusers to blame their victims and make up lies when caught. Trevor spent 6 hours in county jail before his brother posted his $10,000 bail. The legal aid office called and said Isabel Nguyen would take my case for free since it involved child endangerment and stolen funds. She came to the hospital that afternoon with a stack of papers and spent 2 hours hours explaining everything that would happen in court. She said the judge would look at evidence of medical neglect and stolen money, plus Trevor's arrest record. She helped me organize all my evidence into folders with labels for each type of abuse and theft. The hospital social worker came in with amazing news that their charity program approved a full week of diabetic supplies for Emily. They gave us insulin pens, testing strips, lancets, alcohol wipes, and even glucose tablets for low blood sugar emergencies. It was more supplies than we'd had in years, and Emily actually smiled when she saw the proper pen needles instead of the expired ones we'd been reusing. The night before the custody hearing, my ex came to the hospital, and we sat in the cafeteria making a plan for Emily's care. We wrote down rules about doctor appointments, medication schedules, and how we'd communicate about her needs without fighting. He showed me the apartment he'd found near the hospital with a real kitchen and working heat plus a separate bedroom for Emily. We agreed he'd handle medical decisions since he had insurance through his trucking job, and I'd get updates about every appointment. The custody hearing started at 9 in the morning in a small courtroom downtown. Sophie stood up first and read her report about finding Emily in critical condition with organ damage from years of untreated diabetes. She showed photos of our car where we'd been sleeping and the moldy basement apartment before that. She explained how Trevor stole $33,000 meant for Emily's medical care while she suffered from hunger and untreated infections. She listed every hospitalization, every missed day of school, every time Emily collapsed from low blood sugar because we couldn't afford supplies. The judge looked through medical records showing Emily's weight loss, vision problems, and kidney damage. He asked my ex about his living situation and ability to provide stable housing and medical care for Emily. My ex showed pay stubs from his 3 jobs, the lease for the new apartment, and bank statements proving he could support Emily properly. The judge then turned to me and said he understood I was a victim of financial abuse, but Emily needed immediate stable care that I couldn't provide while homeless. He granted temporary custody to my ex with requirements for CPS supervision and twice weekly check-ins. I had to complete nutrition counseling, mental health treatment, and secure stable housing before getting unsupervised visits. It felt like my heart was ripping apart, but I knew Emily needed her dad's insurance and apartment more than my pride needed to keep her. I signed the papers agreeing to supervised visits 3 times a week at the CPS office. Sophie explained I'd need to show progress in therapy, gain weight to prove I was eating, and find safe housing within 6 months. I'd also have to take parenting classes even though I'd been Emily's only real parent for years while Trevor stole from us. The visits would be watched by a social worker who'd write reports about our interactions for the judge to review later. 2 weeks after the hearing, Wright called to say Trevor was officially charged with wire fraud, theft over $10,000, and child endangerment. Wright sat down with me the next morning and pulled out a thick folder. He spread papers across the table showing me timelines and court dates. The grand jury would meet in 3 weeks to decide on formal charges. After that, Trevor would get arraigned and could ask for a trial or take a plea deal. The whole thing could take 6 months to a year depending on what Trevor's lawyer did. Wright said to keep all my receipts and write down everything I remembered about the stolen money. He gave me his card and told me to call if Trevor tried to contact me. The restraining order paperwork would be ready tomorrow. Meanwhile, Emily kept getting better each day in the hospital. Her blood sugar dropped from the 600s down to normal range for the first time in forever. The nurses taught her how to use the new insulin pen properly. She could actually walk to the bathroom without getting dizzy. On day 5, Colin said Emily was stable enough to go home with her dad. Her kidney numbers looked better, and she'd gained 3 pounds already. My ex picked her up in his truck with a bag full of medical supplies the hospital gave us. I watched them drive away knowing it was best for Emily even though it hurt. The social worker at the shelter helped me fill out emergency food stamp paperwork. Within a week, we got approved for $200 a month. The Medicaid application went through even faster since Emily was already in the hospital system. Suddenly, we had real insurance that covered everything, including the special diabetic supplies. The shelter program wasn't just a bed to sleep in. They had job training classes every morning and group therapy in the afternoons. The counselor helped me write a resume even though I hadn't worked a real job in years. They had computers we could use to apply for work. Other women there had been through similar stuff with abusive partners stealing money. My ex called me about setting up rules for the transplant fund. He wanted to make sure every dollar went to Emily's medical needs. We met at a bank and added my name to view the statements, but he kept control of withdrawals. The banker helped us set up automatic payments to the hospital for Emily's ongoing care. Any big expenses would need both our signatures. Wright helped me change all my passwords on every account I had. He showed me how Trevor had been reading my emails for years to intercept messages. We went to the post office and got a P.O. box so Trevor couldn't steal my mail anymore. The postal worker said they'd been seeing more cases like mine lately. Wright documented everything for the additional mail theft charges against Trevor. Emily's school counselor called about setting up extra help. They had a tutor who could work with Emily 3 times a week to catch up. The counselor knew about the bullying and said they'd address it with the other kids. Emily wouldn't have to be garbage girl anymore. They even had a breakfast program so she could eat before classes started. My first therapy appointment was hard. The therapist weighed me and said I was 40 pounds underweight. My blood work showed vitamin deficiencies and my iron was dangerously low. She said my body had been in starvation mode for so long it forgot how to process food normally. Why is Trevor's brother posting his bail after all this evidence of child endangerment? Makes me wonder about their family dynamic and what Trevor told him about the situation to get that kind of support when Emily nearly died from his theft. Recovery would take months of slowly adding calories and nutrients back. She prescribed supplements and gave me meal plans to follow. My ex and I sat down with Sophie to figure out how to parent together. We wrote down rules about pickup times and doctor appointments. Everything would go through text or email so we had records. No fighting in front of Emily, no talking about the past or Trevor or money problems when she was around. Just focus on her health and school. It took Emily's stomach time to adjust to regular food. The first few days she threw up after every meal, but slowly her body started accepting small amounts. First just crackers and juice, then some rice and chicken broth. By the end of the week she managed to keep down breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Her cheeks got some color back. She even asked for seconds at dinner, which made my ex tear up. The supervised visits started the next week at the CPS office. I got 3 hours every Tuesday and Friday to see Emily. We did homework together at a little table while the social worker took notes. Emily showed me her math test where she got a B+. She was staying awake in class now that she had food and insulin. The teacher said she was participating more and even raised her hand to answer questions. Wright called with updates on Trevor's case every few days. Trevor's lawyer was trying to get the charges reduced, but the evidence evidence was too strong. The prosecutor had bank records, Venmo transactions, and years of proof that Trevor stole money meant for a sick child. Michelle agreed to testify about receiving money from Trevor. She thought he was divorced and had no idea about Emily being sick. Trevor kept changing his story, which made him look worse. First, he said I agreed to him keeping the money. Then he said he was saving it for Emily's future. Then he claimed my ex never really sent anything. But Wright had every single transfer documented with screenshots and bank statements. The CPS office had those plastic chairs that stuck to your legs, and a table covered in crayon marks from other kids. Emily sat across from me with her math book open while the social worker watched from the corner. She'd gained enough weight that her cheeks didn't look hollow anymore, but her hands still shook when she held the pencil. We worked through fractions together, and she actually smiled when she got one right. The social worker wrote notes about how we interacted, but I tried to ignore her and focus on Emily. She told me the hospital food was better than what we used to eat, and I had to look away so she wouldn't see me tear up. 3 hours went by fast, and when it was time to go, Emily hugged me tight and whispered she was glad the grown-ups were fixing things. Wright called me the next morning while I was cleaning the shelter bathroom as part of my chores. The district attorney took the case, and they were moving forward with prosecution on multiple charges, including wire fraud and child endangerment. He came by that afternoon to help me fill out restraining order paperwork against Trevor. The judge approved it within 2 days, which meant Trevor couldn't come within 500 feet of me or Emily. Wright also got the court to freeze Trevor's accounts so he couldn't hide any more money before trial. Sophie came to the shelter for our weekly meeting and had good news about Emily's progress. She'd gained 2 pounds already, and her blood work showed her kidney function was improving with proper insulin management. The doctors were optimistic that with continued treatment they could prevent further organ damage. Sophie also said Emily was talking more in therapy and drawing pictures that weren't about death anymore. My ex called to say the motel manager heard our story from another guest and offered him a discount on the extended stay rate. It wasn't much, but it helped since he was paying for Emily's food and the motel while still sending money for her medical supplies. Small acts of kindness meant everything when you'd been living in hell for so long. The shelter had strict rules about completing their program requirements, and I finished my first full week without missing anything. Group therapy in the mornings where we talked about trauma and abuse, job skills training in the afternoons where they taught us how to write resumes and do interviews, life skills classes at night covering budgeting and nutrition. The structure helped me focus on moving forward instead of dwelling on what Trevor did. They even had a computer lab where I could apply for jobs and check my email. Emily's teacher sent a note home through Sophie saying she'd stayed awake through all her classes that week. First time in over a year she hadn't fallen asleep at her desk from exhaustion or low blood sugar. The teacher said Emily was participating more and even volunteered to read aloud in English class. Other kids were starting to include her at lunch instead of calling her names. My ex picked me up for Emily's endocrinologist appointment since we both needed to understand her long-term care. The doctor explained how the years of poor control had affected her growth and development. She showed us charts of where Emily should be versus where she was. We both took notes about carb counting and insulin ratios and signs to watch for complications. The doctor said with proper management, Emily could still live a normal life, but it would take time to undo the damage. We asked questions about everything from exercise to what she could eat at birthday parties. My ex recorded parts on his phone so we wouldn't forget important details. Isabel called me at the shelter to say Trevor's lawyer reached out about a plea deal. He wanted to avoid trial and was willing to plead guilty to reduce charges. Isabel said she'd only consider it if Trevor agreed to full restitution of the stolen money plus interest. She also wanted him to serve at least some jail time and have it on his record permanently. The lawyer said they'd think about it, but Isabel told me not to hold my breath since Trevor still thought he did nothing wrong. During my next visit, Emily showed me a picture she drew at the hospital art therapy group. It was the 3 of us standing together at the hospital, but this time we were all smiling. She'd colored it carefully with markers and titled it Getting Better at the top. Such a change from the coffin pictures she used to draw when she was starving. I asked if I could keep it and she nodded and said she'd make me more happy pictures. The job counselor at the shelter found a medical billing training program that would work with my schedule. 8 weeks of classes that would certify me to work in healthcare offices doing insurance claims and patient billing. It wasn't nursing, but it was a step back toward medical work and would pay better than cleaning offices. The program even helped with job placement after graduation. I filled out the application right there, and they approved me to start the following week. Classes would be in the mornings, so I could still do my shelter requirements in the afternoons. 2 weeks later, Sophie came by the shelter for our scheduled meeting and brought good news. She'd been tracking our progress through the shelter reports and Emily's medical updates. The stack of paperwork she carried was thinner this time. She sat across from me in the common room and explained that based on Emily's weight gain and stable blood work, she was reducing our supervision level. We'd still have monthly check-ins, but no more surprise visits or weekly reports. I signed the new custody agreement that gave me more flexibility for overnight visits once I got proper housing. The next morning, Emily called me excited because she could finally see the board at the school again. Her teacher had noticed her squinting and arranged for the school nurse to do a vision screening. The results showed she needed glasses badly, but proper nutrition was already helping her eyes recover. The school's social worker found a program that provided free glasses to kids while insurance claims processed. Emily picked out purple frames from the catalog they showed her. When she put them on for the first time, she gasped and said she forgot trees had individual leaves. My ex picked her up from the school that day and texted me a photo of her wearing them and smiling. We'd been texting daily about Emily's medications and appointments without arguing once. He'd send her blood sugar numbers every morning, and I'd respond with meal suggestions that worked with her insulin schedule. When Emily got a cold, we coordinated who would take her to urgent care without the old fights about who was responsible. At her next endocrinology appointment, we both took notes and asked questions together. The doctor commented on how well we were working as a team. 4 weeks passed like that, just focusing on Emily's needs instead of our past. Then Isabel called with news about Trevor's case. The prosecutor had offered him a deal to avoid trial. 3 years probation and full restitution of the stolen money in exchange for pleading guilty to reduce charges. Trevor's lawyer was pushing him to take it since the evidence was overwhelming. Isabel said it wasn't the justice we deserved, but at least there'd be accountability and Emily would get the money back. Trevor signed the plea agreement the next week at the courthouse. I didn't go, but Isabel attended and said he looked smaller somehow. The judge ordered him to pay back $500 monthly starting immediately. It would take years, but at least Emily would eventually get what was stolen from her. Meanwhile, Emily kept gaining weight steadily. At her next appointment, she'd gained 5 more pounds, and her kidney function test came back better. Dr. Collins showed us the improvement on the charts and said we'd successfully prevented an immediate crisis. Emily would need monitoring for life, but the acute danger had passed. Her body was slowly healing from years of starvation and uncontrolled diabetes. Trevor's taking a plea deal after all that denial makes me wonder if reality finally hit him, or if his lawyer just scared him straight with how bad the evidence looked. 3 years probation seems light for stealing from a sick kid. The shelter case manager called me into her office with more good news. A transitional housing unit had opened up, and I qualified based on my program completion. It was just a studio apartment, but it had a real kitchen and a door that locked. Best part was it allowed overnight guests, so Emily could stay with me on weekends. I packed my few belongings from the shelter and moved in that afternoon. The apartment was tiny, but it was mine. I set up a corner for Emily with the air mattress I bought at Goodwill. She helped me organize the kitchen cabinets, and we made spaghetti together on my first night there. It felt like playing house, but it was real. Emily started back at the school full-time the following week with a 504 plan for her medical needs. The nurse kept glucose tablets in her office, and Emily could test her blood sugar whenever she needed. Her counselor helped her catch up on missed work and arranged for tutoring in math. In science class, she met a girl named Casey, who also had type 1 diabetes. They compared insulin pumps and traded low blood sugar snack ideas. Casey invited Emily to sit with her at lunch, and suddenly Emily had a friend. She came home talking about Casey's continuous glucose monitor and how they were going to be lab partners. 6 weeks after that terrible night when everything fell apart, the 3 of us sat in a real restaurant. Emily ordered chicken fingers and actually finished them. My ex and I spread out her medical records and insulin logs on the table between our plates. We planned her upcoming appointments and discussed saving for a continuous glucose monitor. Emily drew on her napkin while we talked. Another happy picture of the 3 of us. She looked up at one point and said she was glad we were all together, even if we weren't a normal family. My ex reached across the table and squeezed her hand while I tried not to cry. The waitress brought Emily a free dessert when she heard it was a celebration dinner. We watched Emily eat ice cream without worrying about her blood sugar crashing later. Her cheeks had color again, and her hair was growing back where she'd pulled it out. She looked like a regular kid eating dessert with her parents, planning a future that finally seemed possible. Thanks for hanging out and letting me wonder through all this with you. It's been a pretty fun journey together. Until we meet again, subscribe for more content like this.